Hello, everyone. I'm Sherry Rolfing, your host of the ACAP Member Engagement and Retention Showcase. I'd like to welcome you today to our session presented by the Softheon team. They're going to be discussing building lifelong loyalty, creating one member experience across lines of business. But before I turn it over, I have a few housekeeping items. This session, along with all ACAP calls and webinars, will be held in accordance with the ACAP antitrust guidelines. These guidelines can be viewed on our website. We will record today's call and will post it and the slide deck on the Showcase website. Always remember, if your plan is seeking services, be sure to check out our list of preferred vendors, just like our strategic ally, Softheon. You can look at the top of our homepage and click on the preferred vendors link. You can also post a note or even an RFP on the preferred vendor connection portal. During today's session, you can ask a question at any time by clicking on the Q&A icon in your Zoom window and typing it in. Now I'll pass it over to Kevin to get us started.
Right. Thank you so much, Sherry, and good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in this great country that we live in. We are so grateful to be here with you today. And Sherry had just shared with us that we're actually the last of the member engagement and retention showcase. So hopefully there's some new content that we'll be able to share with you all that will keep you interested. But we are so grateful that you've chosen to spend your Friday afternoon with us to talk about such an important topic. There are so many different headwinds and challenges, and I feel like we say that ad nauseum these days, but there's so much that's going on in the world that we need to be reconsidering ways in which we're delivering up value to the members that count on us. And I've been so grateful to be part of this journey with ACAP and with many of the health plans that'll be tuning in over the past several years to solve this exact problem of building lifelong loyalty amongst your members. So we're super excited to have you here and look forward to getting into the content. For a brief introduction, I'm Kevin Deutsch. I lead our health plan business here at Softheon. I've been with the organization over a decade now and been with the ACA exchange specifically since open enrollment 2. And I usually use this in my opening that I was fortunate enough to miss the first open enrollment and all the challenges that came with it. But I've been in this ever since. And as I mentioned, in working with health plans across the country, I've learned a lot of lessons on how plans really obsess over the member experience and how they can continue to drive value. And we're looking forward to sharing some of those stories with you here today. And I'm joined by my colleague, Tom, who will say hello.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Very nice to be here with you all today and looking forward to our discussion and really hope that you all take something away from today to be able to take back into practice. I am our Executive Vice President here at Softheon. I actually oversee all of our go-to-market efforts on both our Softheon side, which supports our health plan business, and then the Well side of our business, or Well brand, if you will, which focuses on working with the BenTech and FinTech portion of the industry. So excited about today's discussion. I've spent the better part of the last 15 years working with health plans in this space around both business processes and technology that supports it, as well as consumer transparency. So this topic is near and dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to digging in.
All right. Well, this conversation wouldn't be possible without the support from ACAP and the ACAP member plans. We've been, as long as I've been at Softheon, we've been partnered with ACAP, and over the past several years became a strategic ally. And one thing I love most about ACAP is that the plans that are a part of this organization are truly mission focused and working to provide value in the communities that you serve. And we don't see this everywhere else in which we operate, but we get this consistently with ACAP. And we're fortunate to partner with 8 of the ACAP member plans to help us fulfill our mission, which is to make healthcare affordable, accessible, and plentiful for all Americans. And as I mentioned, we would not be able to do that without the support of our plans. And that's where we're able to present this topic, is the lessons that we've learned in working with these plans. So Softheon in general, we partner with regional plans such as the safety net plans that may be tuning in here, as well as the large national plans as well in multiple different lines of business, from marketplace to Medicare Advantage to employer group coverage. and so on and so forth. So a lot of the content that we're going to share here today is a result of the many years of experience and lessons learned with these plans. And we're also grateful to add 2 new ones to the list since the last time we spoke with ACAP in Community Care Plan and Community Health Group, both new entrants into the ACA exchange this year, and grateful to have their partnership and support as well. So over the next several minutes that we spend together, we're going to really focus on how we're building lifelong loyalty. And where we're going to start is some of the headwinds and changes to expect. I'll call them opportunities as opposed to challenges that are existing in the market today. From there, we'll talk about how we take some of those challenges and apply the lessons that we've learned and more recent ways that we've looked at managing these markets across different lines of business. And then we'll share some unique case studies with you all in our experiences, specifically with ACAP plans on how they're improving the member experience and priming themselves to grow. And the 3 themes that you're going to hear consistently from Tom and I over our time together is the concept of optimizing, retain, and grow. And we're going to touch on each of those as we progress forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Tom, and he's going to give a little bit of the lay of the land of what's going on, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with already.
Yeah, and it also feels like it's changing on the daily. And I know that a lot of the folks on this call are probably equally as tuned in to what we're hearing on a day-to-day basis related to the reconciliation bill. And I'm certainly going to touch on that a little bit later in a little further detail on some of the impacts that it may have. But as a broad landscape in terms of what Kevin said earlier, it does feel like we ad nauseum are saying there's a lot of headwinds or tailwinds. Change does seem to be the only constant that we're seeing. And I just wanted to highlight a few key areas that do have impacts across each of these respective organizations that are attending a webinar like this. So whether it's new mechanisms that are being deployed to identify where there are opportunities for savings in the Doge system that has been rolled out, or whether it's the uncertainty around whether the enhanced subsidies for premiums are going to potentially go away at the end of this year, or these new efforts to, or I should say intensified efforts to uncover fraud, waste, and abuse. I'm sure some folks saw the news yesterday that United Healthcare is being investigated for Medicare fraud now. All of these things, contrast those against some of the kind of operational structures of things like state-based marketplaces that are becoming more prevalent. We're seeing more and more states move to state-based and away from the federally facilitated marketplace. And then lastly, what seems kind of, I would say inevitable right now is that we're going to see an increase in uninsured individuals. And, what are the impacts that might have and the opportunities that also might present in terms of that optimization, growth, and retention. So I think these are just important things that you guys will continue to see evolve, but things that we have to keep at the forefront and that do have direct impacts on each of our respective businesses. Then as we kind of shift gears and think about, all right, if we zoom in to a specific market, in this case, the individual market, what are the changes there, or what are the potential opportunities that might be coming down the pipe for all of you? And, Kevin touched on this idea of optimization, retention, and growth. And, I think each of these respective buckets are really important. So first, I'd be remiss if I didn't address one of the most obvious opportunity, which also comes with some risk. All of you, I'm certain, saw the news that Aetna is planning to, exit the individual market. That represents just over 1 million lives that are going to be up for grabs. With that comes, a great potential for membership growth. It also comes with some risks of technology scalability, operational efficiency, and some of those sorts of downstream challenges that folks can face as you see a significant up ramp in volume of membership. Then there's this expectation that we'll see kind of some churn or movement between products in the individual market. So see some shifting from folks bouncing between Medicaid, ACA, small group, and ICHRA, and what that implication might be and what the opportunity this does bring with it some risk. Obviously, if we're talking about retention, as you see people bounce between products, there's opportunity for them to move to other products and or other companies. And without continuity across the experiences and the solutions that might be offered, this can present a significant challenge in relation to retention or growth. Then I think it's really important for plans to have strategies around member engagement and for optimizing the administrative elements, because most, if not all, plans are already tightening budgets and looking for ways to reduce administrative costs. One thing we've heard commonly is that a lot of the plans that we're working with are really focused on how do we drive down our admin expenses. And a few of the strategies that we're hearing from folks involve things like vendor consolidation. So how can we work with a single partner to cover entire workflows instead of having to contract with disparate entities to handle an entire workflow? With that comes those economies of scale. It also potentially increases the likelihood that you can produce a frictionless experience for those members. And obviously the cost gets lower as you're working with one particular entity as opposed to spending the administrative cycles to contract and have vendor management over several different entities through the process. The last piece I skipped over, you might notice ICRA, because we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that later, but this is one that is seeing some significant growth, and I'll touch on this later, but the reconciliation bill is going to have some significant impact on that as well. So then lastly, I just would call out as we move into kind of this idea of loyalty, and you know, I think it's really interesting to consider the landscape and the opportunity that exists. It's important to think about technology and data and how that data is connected across different types of coverage. So as an example, identifying those members who might be nearing that transition from their individual coverage on the ACA into Medicare. How do you prepare? How do you optimize your internal operations to manage that process and the opportunity that you might have to see that transition happen and happen seamlessly? Can you provide a frictionless experience that isn't full of surprises or that doesn't treat them like a brand new member that you haven't had before? Then that ability to optimize and streamline operations and data is really another way to bolster loyalty, because you can grow in your product sets. So whether it's expanding your geographies or diversifying the off-market products that you might provide, or whether it's expanding the sorts of lines of business that you might participate in, whether it's you haven't had a Medicare line of product and now you want to jump into that space, or you haven't delved into Medicaid and there's an opportunity there. These are a couple of those pieces that certainly present opportunities for growth, but going back to that technology and data, you have to have those pieces in place and be thoughtful in what that structure is. Lastly, on the retention side, I think when we think about loyalty and retention, I know that everybody here has different brands that they may be loyal to or experiences that they feel like are fantastic. One of the things that certainly always jumps out at me is that we as a country and probably as a world prefer things to be easy, and making it easy to retain members is one of those areas that or easy for a member to renew or to continue to maintain continuity in their plan. These are things that if you can make experiences easy and make life easy for that member, the retention is much more likely to stay there. So one example of that would be in the payment and billing experience. So are you delivering easy experiences for them to be able to enroll in things like auto pay? Are you providing opportunities for them to pay across all sorts of mechanisms, including things like credit cards? Are you providing opportunities for services, as an example, where you would automatically know that a member's card is going to expire and update that card to a new card with a new expiration date? These are all fairly simple things, but they're things that have a really drastic impact on retention and that loyalty. As we see kind of disruptions or challenges that exist in those types of workflows, those bumps in the road become divergent opportunities for them to explore alternative options or to leave your product and your plan set. So Kevin, I know you're going to touch a little bit deeper on the product piece that I kind of hinted at here. So why don't we dig into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Tom teed it up perfectly to segue into the next part of our conversation. There are plenty of challenges, which we've labeled as opportunities, but more so, it's an opportunity for us to get back to the basics in a sense and rethink the way that our organizations are structured. And so we love this visual that's on the screen for a number of different reasons because it can be interpreted in different ways and have different powerful meanings. And I'll step through them here in just a moment. At Softheon, we've been heavily focused in the ACA exchange space from the very beginning. And you see that represented by that middle gear. And for those of you that are tuning in, you may have a different representation of this. Many of the safety net plans may have started in Medicaid and then branched out into Medicare, more recently into the individual marketplace. So the representation here is that you may have your central focus and central gear. But as we've grown at Softheon, we've reused a lot of the same solutions that we've put in place in the ACA exchange, which has allowed us to more quickly turn these other gears, whether it be in Medicare, whether it be in ICHRA, whether it be employer-sponsored coverage, in any of these different markets by taking the lessons learned and the processes and the solutions and the documentation, even the people in many senses. For those of you that are operating these safety net plans, many of the individuals are working on multiple different lines of business. So there's a lot of lessons that you could take from your initial implementation in Medicaid, or in our case, the exchange, which will allow you to scale into these other lines of business. So as we have these challenges in front of us about consolidation and doing more with less while continuing to grow, it's this constant balance of retain what you have and manage your costs, but then also grow at the same time, because if you're not growing, you're dying. So the only way to do that is to serve up consistent processes, which lead to consistent experiences. So the real headline here is you need to diversify your product. Maybe Medicaid worked for a given period of time, and maybe that's still your largest gear in the diagram, but these adjacent markets, it will not be as difficult to get into the adjacent markets once you get that solid core. In our case was the ACA exchange, and for you, it may be Medicaid. And so another way to look at this, and we find this interesting, is that there is so much movement, and Tom alluded to this earlier, between these different lines of business. So you could look at these gears as ways for individuals to move from maybe Medicaid into the exchange, as we saw with the public health emergency. Maybe they get hired by an employer and they have group coverage, and maybe their employer decides to now offer an ICHRA. So now they're shopping for individual coverage with an ICHRA. There is so much movement between each of these different markets that it would be a real missed opportunity if you were treating them brand new every single time, even though they're still working with the same health plan. And so that's the real, there's so many different meanings. That's why we love this diagram, but focus on having that stable core, building those consistent processes, and then reusing those same things, replicating these gears and making sure that those connections are clear and they're seamless for the individuals that are navigating throughout your system. And this is how we've been partnering with health plans, and we've seen other health plans do the same thing as they navigate forward. So as we continue on in the conversation, we want to talk about how that in and of itself is now going to lead to better member experiences. And so the box that you're seeing all the way to the left is that stable foundation that I keep preaching. Stable core related to all of your lines of business that you're serving. You're keeping consistency between those, and consistency is what's going to allow you to deliver a better member experience. Now I'm going to hold this thought for just a second because we're going to get to it in a moment, and Tom alluded to it earlier. Data is so important in all of this, whether it's member data that you're receiving in files from the different exchanges and states, or it's data that you're capturing on utilization of the portal. It's so important that that data is centralized within your organization so that it can be used to fuel everything else. And when I talk about data, I don't just talk about membership data and payment data. I'm also talking about your process documentation, the SOPs that you have in place. Where does that data live? Because that's what's going to power these next several steps towards improving the member experience. So as we continue to progress forward, AI is a topic, and it would have to come up in this conversation, or it would be a missed opportunity on our part. Many times, and I know I've spoken in ACAP forums about this before, many times we're so focused on, I need to do something in AI, and I need to go and make sure that I'm doing AI. It's not so much doing AI, it's understanding what problem you're solving first. And so by having that foundation in place, unifying your different lines of business and providing consistency, then you can utilize AI to enhance that even further and make sure that there's the ability to scale some of these experiences that you're providing. So I want to make sure that those that are leaving this session here today, they think about focusing first on where is your data and how am I making sure that my foundation is strong. Then I'm considering layering on tools in AI, and we'll give a couple of examples in the slides that follow, which will then, once you have that piece complete, then you can lead to self-service. And now this is self-service both to your internal staff, it's also self-service to your members, which reduces the burden on both of those different cohorts to ultimately provide a better experience. Now, most importantly to all of this is making sure that there is a continuous feedback loop built into this process. You're not going to get it right the first time. Nobody gets anything right the first time. Our journey through the ACA marketplace is still ever evolving because the rules change, the experience needs to change as a result. So you're constantly looking for areas where you can make small tweaks, and we'll share some case studies in a moment where that was done to ultimately improve the way you're retaining members, the way you're acquiring new members, the way that you're retaining your own staff and keeping them motivated to serve in these different lines of business. So this step-by-step approach we've found helpful internally at Softheon as we're looking to deliver these solutions, but we've also found it helpful externally with our health plan partners that are taking this very calculated and methodical approach to slowly but surely provide a more connected and streamlined member experience. So those were more theoretical. We want to get into a few specific examples and then some client case studies where we've seen this in action. But I want to dig deeper into this data infrastructure concept. As the market has become more and more complex and carriers have partnered with different solutions to offer up a certain service or deliver value to your members, data is scattered all over the place. And I can guarantee that those are listening would relate to this, that you may not know where the data is stored for all of these programs that you're running and all of these different integration points that exist. So I'd say that one really key takeaway from this conversation is to know where your data lives and centralize as much of that data as possible. We talk about interoperability and the standards that exist there. That is so critical for you to be able to empower things like artificial intelligence, self-service tools, and so on and so forth. I heard somebody say recently at a conference that we were at that AI needs IA, IA standing for information architecture. And I can't agree anymore with that because of the fact that you can't do AI if you don't know where your data is and that data isn't structured in such a way that's going to be productive. So data is at the core of everything that we're doing, and I would say that that is a primary focus area as we continue forward. Core solutions, what we mean by this is using the same best practices, the same systems, the same rules to ultimately serve in different capacities. Now, we know that the ACA exchange, the marketplace, is very different than Medicare Advantage. However, some of the core tenets are still the same, whether it be processing enrollment files, sending a bill to a member, collecting a payment. So at Softheon, we've kept those processes consistent while around the edge managing those specific rules for that line of business. So when we talk about core solutions, we mean those core capabilities, whether it be enrollment, billing, payments, they keep that same core tenet and structure while managing the rules around the edges. Anytime that you're sharing data across an integrated system, there is potential for reconciliation challenges. For those of you that operate in the ACA exchange, reconciliation challenges lead to friction with members. If CMS has one view of a member and you have something else, there is a major disconnect, and that's going to lead to abrasion. It's going to lead to Hicks cases. So in short, you should look to build as much automation as possible around reconciliation and prioritize this, because one, it'll keep you in the good graces of CMS, which we've seen what happens when that goes wrong. And it'll also reduce the number of Hicks cases that are coming in. It's reducing that manual burden. And this is where something like AI might come in really handy. I want to give an example of the chatbot support. And there's been numerous of these, but there's one in particular that we've used internally that may be helpful for folks that are listening. We found a significant challenge as we continue to grow as an organization with onboarding new operations staff and get those team members productive. We saw the same actually with product management and engineering as well, and just more broad, that it takes a really long time to get somebody up to speed on an incredibly complex solution. So what we did was we took our internal wiki site, which has all of our documentation from process documentation, even to our code base, and we put an AI tool on top of it that empowers our team to get to answers more quickly than they have in the past. So what this has done for us, it has streamlined getting team members up to speed and productive in the workforce. It's allowed us to be more consistent in the responses that we're providing because of the fact that we delivered a solution like this. And we can see this as something that if you're utilizing this type of tool for your internal staff, inherently that will provide better member experiences because they don't have to continue to say, let me call you back, I'll get back to you on this. Instead, they're getting access to immediate information. And so this leads to the last point here, is that if you have a tool like that in place that's sitting on top of the data that you have access to, it will allow you to start to expose some of these things externally. Now, healthcare, we're in a very sensitive environment. So there's only so much that you want to defer to a robot. And that's why they talk about this concept of human in the loop. What this will allow you to do is to start to, for the repetitive tasks, allow that to become self-service for the individual member or for your internal staff. And then from there, you can continue to slowly and gradually expand and offer more solutions out to the individuals that are utilizing your solutions. So in general, these are just some strategies that we've seen when done successfully that turn into something that could be helpful for our health plans. Now, we're going to continue along our journey here, and we're going to talk about specific case studies and opportunities within these buckets of optimize, retain, and grow. And I'm so grateful that we're able to share this information based on the partnerships that we have with our ACAP plans, because this is really their story. It's not ours, and we think it's going to be helpful to share them with you. All right. And so the first one that we'd like to share is UCare out in Minneapolis. I know that they're a newer to ACAP member, and they're newer to Softheon as well. They came to us participating in the Minnesota State Exchange, and they had challenges with providing that consistent experience to their membership. And one thing that stood out to us most immediately, and this is something that we think is really important for all ACAP plans to have in place, is the ability to allow a member to make their binder payment at time of enrollment. There is no better time to effectuate a member's coverage than when they first complete that application. Because like human beings, myself included, if you go and enroll in some solution or some type of insurance and you're not required to pay right away, there's a strong chance, especially if you need to eventually pay something, that you're not going to come back and take care of that specific task that's required. So in this case, we worked with UCare to establish the pay now concept, and that had a dramatic impact on improving their effectuation. And then once you get these members effectuated, it's going to be much harder to lose them, because we also layered that on with something like auto pay, getting members into recurring payments so that they don't have to think about it. These are things that we take for granted, but they're so important to the overall member experience that as soon as you have them, you don't want to lose them. That's why things like enhanced direct enrollment is that you work so hard to get them to your site, to keep them engaged is of primary importance. Now, as part of the UCare journey, as a result of some of the automation that was put in place, and this is, I would encourage everybody to consider this, it allows you to redeploy your resources. And so there's a concept with AI, there's a lot of concern about AI replacing people. And our CEO, Eugene, says this all the time. AI is not going to replace people. AI is going to replace people that don't use AI. So for those organizations that are out there that are looking to start to implement these tools, your team, you may be surprised at how much your team embraces it, and that will allow you to redeploy them to other areas of higher impact in the organization, like we saw with UCare and the work that we're able to do with them. And then going back to the reconciliation concept and managing multiple lines of business and multiple processes within a single entity. Subsidy reimbursement. I know that this is a really sensitive topic now with the potential for the enhanced subsidies to go away, but we worked very closely with UCare to streamline the enrollment and payment processes, which allowed them to more closely reconcile with CMS, leading to additional subsidy reimbursement. So the main message here is ensure that your enrollment process and your payment process are very closely linked with one another because they very much influence each other. If your enrollment data is not accurate, you're having challenges there, you will inherently have issues with your subsidy reconciliation. That's such a critical component to maintaining a sustainable operation. The last thing that I'll talk about is that the initial scope of the work that we did with UCare was for on-exchange. And as Tom talks about ICRA in just a little while, having an off-exchange experience is also quite important. And we were able to work with UCare to establish this off-exchange shopping and enrollment experience, which allowed for them to acquire new members that they didn't previously have access to. So this concept of understanding what your core is, understanding what the core solution is that you're utilizing, and then start to figure out ways in which you can expand around the edges is something that may be quite helpful going forward. I'll share a second case study, and then I'm going to pass it back off to Tom. And this was with Community First Health Plans and another ACAP member. We're fortunate to partner with a number of hospital-owned health plans. And so this concept of being a payvider, what does that actually mean? Well, in Texas, as many of you may know, the uninsured rate is more significant than any other state in the country. So between Community First and other health plans that we work with, they found an opportunity through legislation as well that allows for the hospital system to ultimately pay the member responsibility for these highly subsidized individuals to keep them engaged within the actual health plan and the health system. So if you think about it this way, you have an individual that's going to utilize services at the hospital and they are uninsured, which is a significant portion of the population in Texas. There's an opportunity for the health plan to ultimately enroll those individuals into a highly subsidized plan because that's what they would be eligible for, and then ultimately have the hospital system to pay for that small member responsibility to keep them able to afford their coverage. And as we mentioned earlier, with the enhanced subsidies and the challenges that we have there, you may have members that are going from fully subsidized to owing a few dollars. And I know it doesn't seem significant, but there's data that supports this that says the difference between $0 and $1 is still significant because that's a commitment that has to be made every single month. And that's why there's so many projections about the potential for membership loss in the ACA exchange this upcoming year. So we're really excited about this payvider sponsorship model. I know that this is a sensitive topic out in the market. I know that Texas has specific guidelines that allow you to cover members by all means necessary, but we're seeing a lot of these integrated delivery systems take a look at this model and figure out how you manage the entirety of care across the continuum for these individuals. Because ultimately, they're the ones that are going to be utilizing your services. They're going to be seeing at your doctors. They're going to be going to your hospitals. How do you manage that end-to-end journey and get them enrolled into programs that you have on the health plan side to ultimately be more proactive about the care? And at the end of the day, and I know that this is the mission for the safety net plans that are part of ACAP, you're here to serve in the communities in which you operate in. And something like this payvider model certainly gives you an opportunity to allow for members to get access to care that maybe wouldn't have had that previously. So I would think that this is a pretty strong potential retention opportunity for this upcoming year, especially with the challenges of the enhanced subsidies. And so with that, we've hit our next turning point in the presentation, from optimizing existing processes to figuring out how to retain members, possibly through this payvider model. Now there's a pretty significant growth opportunity that Tom's going to spend some time talking about.
Yeah, and I think most everybody here probably has heard or at least seen something around ICHRA. And I also, though, don't want to always assume that everyone knows what ICHRA is or what it stands for. And so maybe start with kind of baseline education here, and that will be helpful. And then then we can dig a little bit deeper into some of the details around this. So if you're not familiar with it, ICHRA stands for Individual Coverage Health Reimbursement Arrangement. A lot of people automatically throw that A out there as an account, and it's not, it's an arrangement. This was actually brought through an executive order during the Trump administration's first term. And I think a lot of people fail to remember that because it didn't go live until 2020 after the transition had taken place. I think that we'll touch a little bit on that here in a minute, and why I think that's going to be important. But this is all about driving employers toward choice and privatization in ways of insurance that allows employees or empowers employees to make a selection of a plan that is most appropriate for them, instead of having it directed to them by the employer what insurance plan they're going to have. You can kind of think of ICHRA as like the 401k of health benefits, if you will. So as you know, the 401k shifted retirement savings from employer managed pension plans into employee directed accounts, where those people were managing how aggressive or not aggressive their portfolios might be. They were making their investment choices. Much in the same way, ICHRA provides opportunities for employees to have that flexibility to choose the health coverage that best fits their needs, much like they do choose that retirement or investment portfolio now on their own. So a couple of highlights that I would just call out here, one in terms of the need, and you see the statistics here, so I don't need to belabor those, but this was a survey of over 1,000 employees. And I think the one that I'll call out that's certainly most important are those bottom two, around the percent of employees that are worried about their limitation in provider choices. And then that really high number of folks that are citing costs as a primary concern. And there's a lot of opportunity to leverage ICHRA as a way to drive down cost. Then the second piece that's important, and I think a lot of people already have seen this on the periphery. If you haven't, then I would say you probably don't follow the news much, but there's been a lot of investment into healthcare in both the benefit technology space and the financial technology space. And that is to the tune of almost $750 million since 2023. And that generally, what I would say is cash usually leads to, when there's a cash infusion like this, you're going to see market disruption and market opportunity. So one of the things that I know is daunting for a lot of you folks that might be on the call is, okay, now there's a ton of different vendors that are pounding on my door and saying that we have to participate in ICHRA or that we should work with them. Well, we recognize that that's certainly a challenge. And, I think the kind of checklist or cheat list that I would provide out there is, first, vetting these both ICHRA administrators or technology companies in general. do it in a wise fashion and format and be calculated about how you do that, and think about the integration element. Back to Kevin's points that he hammered earlier about data and how critical it is to think about information architecture prior to getting into things like AI. I would say the same holds true as you start thinking about ICHRA and how you can set yourself up successfully to provide things like member support and billing experiences that aren't disruptive and that don't bring additional challenges for your customer services teams. And then lastly, just think about what your strategy is around future growth. And if this doesn't align with where your strategy as an organization is headed, then it may not be the right type of opportunity to explore in the ICHRA space. So those are just a couple of key themes that I wanted to call out. Now let's dig into some of the nitty gritty. So earlier this week, the first blush of the reconciliation bill came out, and you may have heard it referred to as one big beautiful bill. This reconciliation bill actually has almost 40 pages that are specific to ICHRA or that have implications to the ICHRA space. And I would call out these 4 key themes that I think are bound to play into our space in one way, shape, or form. The first is, now that we've all finally gotten comfortable with ICHRA and the name and what it stands for, that may change. So we may see a rebranding of this, which wouldn't be too surprising, to CHOICE, which would be Custom Health Option and Individual Care Expense Arrangements. This, I think, is one that won't have a lot of disruption other than changing an acronym that we had just gotten comfortable with. The second is, I think, a more significant change, which is codifying this mechanism into law as opposed to it being just an executive order. So if this turns into federal statute, that comes with a whole new set of different oversight and things that will apply in different ways from an operational workflow perspective. The third is the potential impact on premiums. There's a lot of speculation about what sorts of premium tax credits would there be both for employers and employees. So there could be some impacts, and I think we'll see some probably negotiations that take place around this, but you can see clearly that there's a positioning here to provide pre-tax premiums to employees and essentially subsidize in the same way that the ACA does today, but to do that through these employer-focused plans where they're facilitating that ICHRA. The last piece is around the employer tax credit, and this being about solidifying what sorts of dollar amounts employers would be able to get in those tax credits. And it's looking like the initial proposal is for $1,200 per employee in the first year, and then $600 in the second year, and that these would be stackable on top of any state credits that might be provided. So there are several states in the country that have already begun rolling out different credits in this space as well. So this would be additive to that, not in place of, which is probably an exciting thing from most people's lenses. So this is, still early days, but kind of in the breaking news, and something that we're all going to be keeping a very close eye on. But back to that theme of growth and what does this present in terms of opportunities, having your hat in the ICHRA game with off-market plans that are available for these ICHRA administrators and benefit administrators and technology companies to be able to offer certainly presents a significant opportunity for membership growth. With that growth, then comes some of those operational challenges. And, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about what some of those pieces are that come into this ICHRA space, because the billing and enrollment components can get more complicated because you have all of those entities on kind of that left-hand side. In the ACA, you're dealing mostly with either healthcare.gov and CMS or a state-based exchange. Now you introduce into this mix all of these additional BenTechs and FinTechs. I referenced earlier $700 million in capital that's been poured into these startups and or growth stage companies. They're all handling this in different ways and have different levels of sophistication related to things like enrollment, billing, payments, all of those pieces. So we are certainly positioning to help health plans and to be able to be in a spot where they can leverage the capabilities of Softheon and our other brand well to provide mechanisms that simplify those complex workflows and working with that high volume of additional players that are coming into the space. So not something that I'm out here saying that you have to use, but I would say that being thoughtful in your approach, given that this is a workflow that does change slightly comparatively against your traditional on-exchange ACA products. So Kevin, with that, I think I did see a couple of questions that have popped through. So we've got, I think 10, 15 minutes left. So maybe we jump into some Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what we have here. Let's start with this one. And maybe Tom, while we're on the topic of ICRA, you might be able to help with. How can community plans compete with the national plans to succeed in the ICRA space?
Yeah, this one is really interesting because I think there's this perception that this is kind of a race to the bottom, and that the national plans, because they've been front and center in this space, that they are the entities that will do the best. And I think each of the respective stakeholders, and I think of ACAP in particular, you know, your community brands and your brand in the community is something that many of you take pride in. And I think part of what ICRA is designed to do is to meet the employee where their needs are. And in the remote working world that we have today, a lot of employers have folks that are very diversely spread across the country. And in many cases, these community affiliated plans are ones that they know the brand of, they might be drawn to, or have providers or networks that they are really excited about. And now that they have a choice, instead of their employer telling them that they are going to use, you know, one of these national brands, which is commonly what you see, now they have that opportunity to explore the options that are being provided by your more regionally focused or provider sponsored health plans. So I really do see it as a good opportunity for these regional players to get into the mix and to solidify themselves in the communities that they represent, more than I do see it as a risk of the nationals are going to dominate this because it's a key part of their strategy. I really think that the brand and the network that these regional carriers represent is a significant advantage for them in a lot of these markets.
Thanks, Tom. It looks like we had another one come in as well. I think maybe I could take a pass at this one. What does early member engagement actually look like in practice? Any examples from plans you've worked with? Well, I know that we had shared the UCare example a bit earlier. What I would say as it relates to early member engagement, and one of the advantages that Tom just mentioned for the community affiliated plans, and specifically the ACAP member plans, is that you are so deeply ingrained into your communities. I'll never forget in working with plans saying that I literally see my members at the supermarket when I'm grocery shopping. And so that's how connected the community plans are with their members. And that really stuck with me. It's not an individual member's issue. This is literally a person that I see walking around the supermarket. So I think there's a unique advantage to being a community affiliated plan like the ACAP plans are. But back to the question about early member engagement, I think providing the minimum number of barriers for a member to ultimately shop for, enroll, and purchase a plan is of utmost importance. If you give them any opportunity to think that this is overly complicated to do, and that I need to go through all of these unnecessary steps that I don't want to have to deal with, I think that's where early engagement goes wrong. I think, to me, successful early engagement is something that is easy to interact with, and I'm very pointedly directed to exactly where I need to be to get access to the care. Because at the end of the day, all of these members simply want access to care. And if there's a barrier that stands in the way of getting access to care, be it, well, I enrolled, but I didn't hear back from you. So what happened? Have you sent them an initial invoice? Have you offered them an opportunity to make a binder payment at time of enrollment? Have you allowed them to sign up for auto pay so they don't have to think about their health insurance, and that they, when they have an issue that comes up, they can go and see a provider and ultimately get the services that they seek? So to answer the question more directly, I think early member engagement is something that is simple, and it's something that gets them to their end goal as quickly as possible.
Kevin, one other one that I saw pop up in the app. What's one area of the member journey that's most overlooked but has huge impact on retention? You want to take a crack at that first?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot of areas of the member journey that's overlooked, I think, which is the importance of this conversation. What I would say is that every member wants to be handled and treated differently. Back to the conversation that they had, I think peace of mind is something that we've seen that is incredibly important. So I think oftentimes we think that retention is all about how much I could be in this individual space. I think it's more so, how do you allow them to set it and forget it? This kind of keep going back to autopay and why it's so important. And even on top of autopay, some of the payment aspects of this, like automatically updating an expiration date or a credit card number when those types of things change, when they're forgotten, the next thing you know, the member is getting a termination notice in the mail saying that they no longer have coverage. And that's the opposite of what a positive member experience is. So I really think the payment experience that's being delivered up, making that as simple as possible, is something that is often overlooked because we think we just need to be sending messages to members all the time, as opposed to, how do I make it so they don't need to interact with me as often as you think they do, because they just want to make sure that they have access to care. So I don't want to trivialize it. None of this is trivial, but that's the way that I would approach it.
Yeah, I agree on the overlooked piece too, because it's something that folks, in our everyday lives, payment is such an easy thing. When you go purchase goods, payment feels very easy these days. You tap a card to something or you hold your phone against something and it's done. I would double down on the payments selection, in particular because of the ICRA space. When you're dealing with these health reimbursement arrangements and the accounts that can be created, there's a variety of different mechanisms that some of these vendors are using for payment, and it can become a challenging situation. And it also is a situation where when a health plan is used to being the operator of the billing processes, whether they do that on their own or through a partner like Softheon, and then you add in a payment vendor that might be the partner to the ICRA administrator who's handling billing, and that you have to suppress some of those bills that might be getting done, the payment piece can get messy, and moving dollars that are coming through a payment vendor that might be API based, or moving dollars that might be using one-time use cards from a solution that is providing those to employees. It can get complicated quickly, and you don't want those members to feel that complication or the kind of the workflow that happens behind the scenes.
Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions being posted in the Q&A. So I think this would be a good time for us to wrap up our time today. Once again, we are so grateful that you've spent your afternoon or morning with us before you head into this weekend. Hopefully the weather is good as well. But we just want to say that at the heart of everything that you all do as health plans, which by extension through Softheon, it's what we feel most connected to, is an improved, streamlined member experience so that members get access to the care that they need and deserve. So everything that we spoke about was in the spirit of providing an improved member experience, which will allow you to optimize, retain, and continue to grow through something like ICRA as an opportunity. So what I would say is continue to ride the wave of the challenges and changes that are to come, but use this as an opportunity to go back to the basics and think about how you might be able to simplify and create more consistency, which will lead to a more positive experience. So with that, we will wrap up here, and Sherry, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. I really want to thank the whole Softheon team for putting this together. And I learned a lot about ICRAs during this, so I appreciate the self-learning that you gave me.
At least we got one.
As a reminder, today's session has been recorded and will be posted along with the slide deck on the Member Engagement and Retention Showcase website. You can find the link under events on ACAP's main page, which is www.communityplans.net. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all.